For those of you who don't know Frank Tufano, aka Frank Tofu Almond Boy, he runs a carnivore diet channel, and much like Sverige, he's also anti-vegan. He actively tries to convince people not to eat a vegan diet for various reasons, although unlike Sverige, he doesn't want to kill and eat people as far as I can tell. Now, when I first came across Frank Tufano, what really stood out to me is how strange and awkward of a person he is. Almost every video on his channel could make it into a cringe compilation.
Hey Frankie boy, fellow viewer wants to die for his community. Oblige him. You get that for making fun of Italians? Frankie Williams knocks it out of the park! Yankee Stadium ball game! He went yard on that one!
And then because of his weird, awkward behavior, he's entertaining enough that you actually start to pay closer attention to him, and then you start to notice some more subtle details about his appearance, like the makeup he wears. Now, Frank will swear up and down that he doesn't wear makeup, and that was the entire point of this weird video. He just wanted to convince everyone that he doesn't wear makeup.
And I also want a big thank you to Frankie the Face for wiping all these chemicals all over his face just to show you clowns that he is not wearing makeup. I don't see any makeup. Do you guys see any makeup?
But I'm still not convinced. That'll happen very quickly, so you may not have noticed it. But right before he wiped his face, there was a jump cut. He didn't actually show himself taking the makeup remover out of the package and then wiping his face all in one continuous shot. So he might have just wiped his face with just a normal paper towel. Now, this isn't definitive proof that Frank wears makeup, but I do think it's strange that Frank would have added a jump cut rather than show a single continuous shot. So if Frank wants to prove that he doesn't wear any makeup, then he should upload another video where he shows what brand of makeup remover he's using, pull it out of the package, and wipe his face with it, all in one continuous shot with no jump cuts. Otherwise, because of the unusual coloration on his face, I think it's reasonable to assume that he's wearing makeup. And with that out of the way, let's take a look at Frank's blood test results. Frank claims he's been following a carnivore diet for 6 years. Frank is pretty young, and he's also at a healthy body weight, so I'm not expecting a lot of things to be off with his blood work, even though he does follow a terrible diet. But the biggest thing that stood out to me on his blood test was his lipid panel. Frank had a total cholesterol score of 319 milligrams per deciliter. That's extremely high. The reference range is 125 to 240, and ideally your total cholesterol score should be below 140. His triglycerides were 157, which is within the reference range. His HDL was 48, the reference range is above 60, so his HDL is low, and his HDL is especially low considering how high his total cholesterol score is, and his LDL was 240, which is astronomically high. The reference range is below 150, and ideally your LDL should be below 70 milligrams per deciliter. So his LDL is about 3.5 times what it should be, and he has a really bad cholesterol to HDL ratio. His ratio is 6.65, when ideally he should have a ratio of 3.5 or below. So his cholesterol to HDL ratio is nearly double what it should be. Now, this should be concerning for Frank since having an elevated LDL cholesterol score significantly increases your risk of heart disease. A recent study published in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology found a direct linear relationship between LDL score and prevalence and severity of atherosclerosis. You should also note that the highest LDL score on this graph is 160 milligrams per deciliter. Frank's LDL score is 240, 80 points higher than the highest numbers in the study, so you can only imagine how much higher Frank's risk of heart disease is. You should also note that atherosclerosis is virtually non-existent in individuals with an LDL cholesterol score below 70 milligrams per deciliter. This perfectly aligns with a previous paper, also published in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology back in 2004, where, based on randomized controlled trial data, regression analysis predicted that atherosclerosis will not progress when LDL cholesterol reaches 67 milligrams per deciliter or below. Primary prevention trials have also shown that coronary heart disease events approach zero when LDL cholesterol is lowered to 57 milligrams per deciliter, and if you have already suffered a heart attack and you want to prevent a second, then you need to lower your LDL even further, down to 30 milligrams per deciliter to have a risk approaching zero. So it's well established that LDL cholesterol plays a direct causal role in heart disease risk, and the most effective strategy for preventing and treating heart disease is to lower one's LDL cholesterol score below 70 milligrams per deciliter. But of course, Frank is dishonest and he has to come up with ridiculous lies and excuses so he can claim that his diet is healthy.
So I'm not going to sit here and debate that LDL is not associated with heart disease. There are plenty of studies showing that statin companies and various people have misled data. The whole cholesterol hypothesis in general is based on injecting rabbits with cholesterol. So I'm not going to go into that.
This is the dishonest nonsense that you'll often hear from Frank. Rather than actually criticizing any research that conflicts with his claims, he just dismisses all of it by claiming, oh, they're all bogus experiments conducted on rabbits. Which makes no sense. Please, Frank, show me one single study I have ever referenced that involved rabbit experiments. He also referenced this paper by Uffe Ravenscoff, a well-known quack in the cholesterol-denying community, and he is the absolute, undisputed king of cherry-picking. The first claim he made in this paper is that there is no association between total cholesterol and degree of atherosclerosis, and he used a study from 1936 as proof, where autopsy results found there was no association between total cholesterol and severity of atherosclerosis. Now, the main problem here is that we have a very recent study, which was published in late 2017, which clearly demonstrates a linear relationship between LDL cholesterol, prevalence, and severity of atherosclerosis. And this is the study I just showed you all. Now, Uffe Ravenscoff's paper wasn't published online until October of 2018, almost a full year after this study was published, and he has yet to correct this error. So as far as I can tell, Ravenscoff is deliberately ignoring the most recent relevant research, and he's cherry-picking studies from over 80 years ago. As this paragraph continues, Uffe Ravenscoff even shamelessly admits to deliberately cherry-picking data. The positive association between total cholesterol and degree of atherosclerosis noted in the study by Solberg disappeared when those with total cholesterol above 350 milligrams per deciliter were excluded. Again, I can't believe how shamelessly this guy does this. So according to Uffe Ravenscoff, if you see a study and the results aren't what you want, well, just ignore it. Act as if it's not real. So if you come upon a study and some of the results don't fit your bias, well, just cut it out, act like it doesn't exist, and only focus on the parts of the study you do like. And I also want to point out that Uffe Ravenscoff often cherry-picks research that isn't widely cited. One way to determine the efficacy of a study or a review is to look at how many times it's been cited. If it has been widely cited, then it probably means it's a good study and it's widely accepted by the scientific community. Well, the autopsy study that Uffe Ravenscoff referenced here only has one citation, and Uffe Ravenscoff is the one who cited it. Now, for comparison, take a look at the study I referenced from the Journal of the American College of Cardiology. It has 37 citations, and you might be wondering how many citations Uffe Ravenscoff's paper has. 0. No one thinks your research is legitimate, and you're about to find out why. Ravenscoff goes on to claim that if high total cholesterol was the major cause of cardiovascular disease, CVD, people with high total cholesterol should have a higher risk of dying from CVD. The hypothesis that high total cholesterol causes CVD was introduced in the 1960s by the authors of the Framingham Heart Study. However, in their 30-year follow-up study published in 1987, the authors reported that for each 1 milligram per deciliter drop in total cholesterol per year, there was an 11% increase in coronary and total mortality. 3 years later, the American Heart Association and the U.S. National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute published a joint summary concluding a 1% reduction in an individual's total cholesterol results in an approximate 2% reduction in coronary heart disease risk. The authors fraudulently referred to the Framingham publication to support this widely quoted false conclusion. This is a shameless, blatant, absolute lie, and once again, Ravenscoff is cherry-picking information to mislead the reader. If you actually read the 30-year follow-up report from the Framingham Heart Study, under the age of 50, cholesterol levels are directly related with 30-year overall and cardiovascular disease mortality. Overall death increases 5%, and cardiovascular disease death increases 9% for each 10 milligram per deciliter increase. Ravenscoff ignored that finding and only mentioned the second half of the abstract because it didn't fit his bias. He deliberately lied about the findings, but that's apparently what you're supposed to do as a researcher. If you find something you don't like, well, just ignore it and only report on the findings you do like. So Ufi Ravenscoff cherry picks bad research that not many people consider credible, and he even goes as far as flat out lying about study findings to support his bias, and no one considers Ufi Ravenscoff credible, yet Frank thought it was a good idea to reference this garbage paper in his video. Frank also has a few more bizarre ideas on heart disease that I don't think he shared publicly yet. I got into an argument with him on Twitter where he claimed that atherosclerosis is not a disease and it's physiologically normal in humans. He first claimed that because we can find atherosclerosis occurring in people of all ages and cultures, even children, it is therefore not a disease and a physiologically normal process. I then explained to him that atherosclerosis is a disease, and the only reason infants develop atherosclerosis is because their mothers have abnormally high cholesterol levels. Frank then proceeded to claim that I was lying and deliberately misrepresented research to suit my own bias, because we all know he doesn't do that. He then proceeded to claim again that atherosclerosis is not a disease because it's prevalent in all human populations. So by Frank's reasoning, if disease prevalence is high enough, that means it's not a disease and it's just physiologically normal. So if most people are obese, well, then that means obesity isn't a disease, it's just physiologically normal for humans to be obese. Do you see how ridiculous Frank's claims are? He claims that, oh, carnivore diet is perfectly healthy, doesn't cause heart disease, but then when you prove to him, yeah, your diet actually does cause heart disease, well, then he ends up claiming, oh, atherosclerosis isn't a disease, clogging your arteries, blocking blood flow, that's perfectly healthy and physiologically normal. He has to actually claim heart disease isn't actually a disease to justify his ridiculous diet. And after I took more time explaining to him that atherosclerosis is in fact a disease, he told me to suck his fat Italian and he's not having a conversation with my rabbit brain. And he said this to me after I was being totally polite to him, not calling him any names or anything. And this brings up another issue with Frank. He's a lying hypocrite. He just recently did an interview with not Dr. Eric Berg where he criticized me for my inappropriate behavior during the debate we had a few months ago.
And I think first thing I want to say is like, it's amazing that you interviewed that vegan guy. I don't know how the heck that you got through that, because I was like just cringing. The guy is literally insane. And
I'm always in the ballpark of, there's no such thing as bad publicity.
Right.
And I went into that podcast hoping, and this was with Vegan Gains, for those of you who don't know, but I went into that hoping, hey, maybe I can get some information across. Maybe I can educate some people. Maybe I can help some people out by going on this. But it ended up just being like he wanted to be right, you know, how debates end up being. I'm surprised I had the patience to get through it, to be honest. The nice thing is, regardless of what anyone says negatively about you, as long as your demeanor is nice and the way you convey yourself is correct, who cares? You know, at the end of the day, you're always going to, that's the way I looked at it. You know, if people come to my channel and see my videos, regardless of how the debate went, regardless of how he framed it, people are going to see me and their opinion's going to change.
So isn't that weird? Frank got mad that I proved him wrong during our debate. He lied about how I conducted myself during that debate. And then in private, he tells me to suck his but he's preaching about being polite and professional. So you're just a two-faced liar, Frank. And he really shows how much of a hypocrite he is when he criticizes vegans. I think, just like with Sverige, Frank is jealous of vegans and he projects a lot of his own insecurities when he criticizes vegans. And one of his main criticisms against vegans and a vegan diet is that he believes vegans constantly crave meat and animal products, and he thinks it's ridiculous that we make mock meats and substitutes. And of course, he has made videos mocking the idea as well. And apologies beforehand for the cringe.
Despite always talking about being vegan and not having animal foods in their diet, vegans do sure go out of their way to replicate animal foods as closely as possible with plant foods. I came across this completely ridiculous video on how to make a fried egg, and I thought it was too good to not share with you guys. For these vegans to think that this is healthier, better for the environment, morally better, is just completely insane. Hey sisters, it's Frankie from Frankie's Naturals here, and welcome back to my vlog. So, oh my god, I could not wait to show you guys my vegan fried egg recipe. For the egg white, we need a 1/4 cup of rice flour and a 1/4 cup of soy or coconut milk because we're plant-based and regular milk is for babies.
Yeah, again, sorry that I had to share that with you. So, Frank thinks it's ridiculous that vegans are making imitation animal products, and he also thinks these imitation products are less healthful. Well, first off, Frank is guilty of the exact same thing. If you search recipe on Frank's channel, you'll find he has a keto or carnivore-friendly noodle recipe, which is absolutely disgusting. Basically, he mixes chicken breasts and an egg together in a food processor until it makes a sludge, and then he puts it into a piping bag and squirts it into boiling water to make the noodles. And then he uses those noodles in his keto carbonara recipe where he mixes bacon, cheese, and egg yolks into the noodles. Gee, Frank, I wonder why your cholesterol score is so high. So here Frank is trying to imitate a plant-based food, noodles, but he criticizes vegans for imitating animal foods. Yeah, that's not hypocritical at all. And of course, this recipe is terrible for heart health for reasons we've already discussed. You'll also notice that the recipes and most of the foods Frank shares on his channel are completely devoid of fiber. This is a big problem because a massive meta-analysis was just published a few days ago in The Lancet, and it involved 135 million person-years of data from 185 prospective studies and 58 clinical trials with 4,635 adult participants. The findings of this meta-analysis are: observational data suggests a 15 to 30% decrease in all-cause and cardiovascular-related mortality and incidence of coronary heart disease, stroke incidence and mortality, type 2 diabetes, and colorectal cancer when comparing the highest dietary fiber consumers with the lowest consumers. Clinical trials show significantly lower body weight, systolic blood pressure, and total cholesterol when comparing higher with lower intakes of dietary fiber. Risk reduction associated with a range of critical outcomes was greatest when daily intake of dietary fiber was between 25 and 29 grams. Dose response curves suggested that higher intakes of dietary fiber could confer even greater benefit to protect against cardiovascular diseases, type 2 diabetes, and colorectal and breast cancer. So the higher your fiber intake, the more protection you have against heart disease, diabetes, and certain cancers. Given this data, it is completely irresponsible to recommend a diet that is completely devoid of fiber, but here's Frank recommending people eat a carnivore diet that has no fiber, and he's criticizing vegans for making healthier alternatives to these foods. But don't worry, according to Frank, heart disease is perfectly healthy and normal, and I'm sure if enough people end up getting diabetes and cancer following his diet, that those diseases will be totally normal as well. Frank also made this other weird video where he claimed that vegans are sugar addicts, and according to him, this is a relatively accurate caricature of a vegan.
I haven't been doing so well lately, and but it's not so bad because most of my diet is natural sugars. Those are fine, you know, like maple syrup, like honey, like dates.
I just want to point out that this video is 5.5 minutes long. Imagine listening to that cringe for 5.5 minutes. So, first problem here, Frank mentioned that vegans are addicted to high sugar foods like honey. Well, honey isn't vegan, it's an animal product. So, Frank doesn't seem to understand what veganism is and what foods are even vegan, and on top of that, Frank eats honey. He made an ice cream recipe a few months ago where he used honey as a sweetener, and a month ago he made a video titled 7 Healthiest Plant Foods where he included honey, and given what he says in these videos, it sounds like he eats honey relatively regularly.
Next food is raw honey. And although raw honey isn't necessarily a health food, I think it's the best way to sweeten something and add slight palatability. You could literally use like a tablespoon of raw honey in like a pastured, grass-fed raw ice cream recipe, and it would literally be enough to sweeten the whole thing. If you put just a tiny bit of this on some beef fat or some even foie gras, it increases the palatability so much and makes it so much more enjoyable.
Oh, okay, so now Frank is claiming that adding pure sugar to his animal-based foods makes them so much more palatable and enjoyable, but vegans are the sugar addicts for eating fruits and vegetables. Yeah, so I hope this gave you a good impression on Frank Tufano. Not only is he just plain wrong, but he's also a dishonest, cowardly hypocrite. After he lost the debate against me and we had that argument on Twitter, he said, "I've already given you debate points to talk on, not giving away any more if you decide to ask for another. You can't win a fair debate mediated by someone else with clear guidelines beforehand," and I accepted his challenge. I told him if he really wants to prove me wrong, we can have a debate on his channel, he can decide the debate topics, and he can even choose a moderator, and I heard absolutely no response back from him after he was just boasting about how easy it would be to beat me in a debate so long as his demands were met. And maybe some of you watching right now are fans of Frank, and you might still think that I'm wrong about veganism and some of these health-related topics, but why would you listen to someone like Frank, who is clearly a dishonest liar, who runs away from a debate against me after he's the one who challenged me in the first place and, like, I agreed to all of his debate conditions. So clearly, Frank doesn't have enough confidence in his own beliefs to debate me again, so why should you listen to someone who doesn't even believe in what they're saying? Clearly, Frank knows he's wrong, and he's just making up lies and bullshit so he doesn't have to admit he's wrong. And if you like this video, maybe consider supporting me on my website. I have some funding perks you may find interesting. If you're looking for clothing, then check out the Vegan Gains store, and as always, keep making those vegan and low cholesterol gains.
Beef. What a relief. When will this poisonous product cease? This is another public service announcement. You can believe it or you can doubt it. Let us begin now with the cow. The way it gets to your plate and how.